She arrived on a Monday, and the string was 11 horses. His name was Aldren, and he was 47, and he had been running the Viray operation in this district for 21 years, which was the adult life he had built after the life before it, which had been the life of a man who had other things. The other things were not here anymore, and had not been here for a long time, and he had built the operation across the 21 years that followed, and the building had been the primary fact of those years, which was the fact he had organized everything else around. He ran horses and cattle, which was the combination that made sense in this country. And he had built a reputation for the quality of his horses, which were well-bred and well-fed and handled well from the start, and the starting of them was the part he had hired out this season because his previous breaker had moved north with his family, and the person who knew his string was no longer available. He had been alone on the operation for 16 years. He had not organized his life around the aloneness or told himself a story about it that required it to be permanent. He had simply been alone, and the alone had been the texture of the 16 years, and he had managed it the way he managed things, which was correctly, and without complaint, and without performing the managing. She came recommended by the Aldren operation 2 districts north, which was where she had spent the previous 6 weeks starting a string of 15, and Aldren had told Aldren that she was the best breaker he had used in 20 years. Which was a specific thing for Aldren to say, because Aldren did not say specific things about people. Galt had sent word, and she had responded and had come, and on the Monday she arrived he walked her to the paddock without introduction, and showed her the string, and she walked the full fence line looking at each horse in the way that a person looked at horses when they were assessing what they had, which was quietly and completely, and without touching them yet. She looked at all 11, and then she said 11 was the right number for 6 weeks. She said at 2 to 3 days per horse for groundwork and 3 to 5 for the saddle work, 11 was what 6 weeks produced if the horses were straightforward, and she had seen that some of them were not going to be straightforward. She said some of them were not going to be straightforward. He asked which ones she meant, and she told him. She looked at the bay in the far corner for a moment, and then at the gray second from the gate. She said those 2 were going to take longer than the stated range. He said the bay had thrown 2 previous breakers. He said the first in the second hour, and the second in the first hour. She said she knew. She said she could tell from the quality of the bay's stillness before she had been in the paddock with it, which was not the stillness of a calm horse, but the stillness of a horse that was ready to make its point. He said what was she seeing in the way the bay was standing that told her what the bay had been through. She looked at the bay for a moment. She said the horse had learned that certain behavior produced a certain response, which was that the people trying to start it went away, and the horse had learned this enough times that it was the horse's working theory about people. She said the horse was not difficult. She said the horse was educated. He said, educated in the wrong direction. He said that was one way to look at it. She said there was no wrong direction for a horse. She said there was only what the horse had learned and what she was going to show it instead. She started on the bay the first morning, while the rest of the string stood in the paddock and watched. Her name was Lark Cade, and she was 31, and she had been starting horses for 11 years, since she was 20, which was the year she had spent 3 months watching a woman in the northern country work a string of 30 horses, and had understood by the end of the 3 months that she was watching something she needed to learn to do, and was going to find a way to learn it. She had asked, and the woman had taught her, and she had spent 2 years learning, and had been doing it on her own since, traveling with the work the way the work required, which was from operation to operation across the season in the districts where the work was, following the horses that needed starting and starting them. She was good at it in the specific way that a person was good at something when they had spent 11 years learning what the thing actually required, and what it actually required was not what it looked like from the outside. From the outside, horsebreaking looked like the imposition of a person's will on an animal that was larger and faster and more powerful, which was a contest the person could only win through escalation. The people who thought horse breaking worked this way were the people who had thrown breakers and sent hands to the ground and ended up with horses that were compliant in the narrow sense of not actively resisting, but that were not horses you could trust. Because what force produced was a horse that had submitted and not a horse that had agreed. From the inside, it was a different thing entirely. It was a conversation in a language the horse already spoke, and what she had spent 11 years learning was the grammar of that language, which was the grammar of pressure and release and timing, and the specific reading of a horse's body that told her where the horse was in its understanding at any given moment. A horse's body told her everything. The set of the ear, the quality of the eye, the place where tension lived in the neck or the shoulder or the hindquarters. The horse was always communicating and she was always reading it, and the reading was what told her what to do next. She did not fight horses. She had found early in the 11 years that fighting a horse produced a horse that knew how to fight, and that was not what she was building. She was building a horse that understood that people were readable and consistent and that the conversation with people was a conversation worth having. She had not found a horse yet that could not be brought to this understanding. And the bay on the first morning was going to be the same. The bay on the first morning was a horse that had been in a conversation with previous breakers and had learned from those conversations that the conversation ended if it pushed hard enough. This was the horse's working theory, and the theory had been confirmed twice, and a theory confirmed twice was a strong theory. She had to show the bay a different kind of conversation, which was a conversation that did not end regardless of what the horse did. She had to show it this not by telling it or by forcing it, but by being there every time the bay expected the conversation to end and finding that it had not ended. The not ending was the thing the horse had never experienced and was therefore the thing that would require the horse to develop a new theory. She was patient with the bay in the round pen on the first morning. The bay tested the theory. It pushed and the conversation did not end. It pushed harder and the conversation did not end. It pushed with everything it had and the conversation did not end, and Larkade was still there in the round pen moving with it and waiting for the moment when the bay would decide to try something other than pushing. The moment arrived. The bay dropped its head, let out a breath, and began to follow her. Galdveer watched from the fence. He had not planned to watch. He was at the fence because it was his operation, and he had a reason to be there for the first 10 minutes. He was still at the fence 3 hours later because he could not make himself leave. He had not intended to watch. He had a full day of work, and none of the work was standing at the paddock fence. He had come to the fence in the morning because it was his land and his string, and he had a legitimate reason to be there for the first few minutes, and he had stayed at the fence because what was happening inside the paddock was not what he had expected. He had hired breakers before. He knew what the work looked like, and he had expected it to look like that, which was the specific controlled energy of a person and a horse working through who was going to direct the conversation. What he was watching was not that. The bay was not working through who was going to direct the conversation. The bay was being invited into one. He had expected the bay to fight. The bay always fought. He had watched 2 experienced hands spend the better part of a morning each on the bay, and had watched the bay make its views on the matter clear with a thoroughness that had sent one of those hands to the ground. What he was watching now was not fighting. The bay was working, which was to say moving and stopping and yielding and resisting and yielding again, and Larkade was moving with it in the round pen with the specific economy of a person who was not wasting any motion. By mid-morning, the bay was following her, not following in response to a cue, following in the way a horse followed something it had decided was worth following, which was freely and with the specific quality of interest that was different from compliance. Not following in the trained sense, not in response to a cue. The horse was following her the way a horse followed something it had decided was safe to follow, which was freely and with the specific quality of interest that a horse showed when it was beginning to understand something rather than something it had submitted to. The bay had thrown 2 breakers, and the bay's working theory was that enough resistance ended the conversation. She had not ended the conversation. She had changed its terms. He stayed at the fence through the morning. He had told himself he would stay for an hour, and the hour passed, and he was still there. He told himself he was watching the horse. He watched the horse. He also watched the way she moved, which was without hesitation and without urgency, and he watched the way she read the horse. The way she turned away when the horse made a try and turned toward it when the horse was ready for more, and the timing of the turning was the thing he could see was the skill, because the turning was always exactly right, and he could not have said how she knew when to turn. This is Dusty Vows, where he hired her to break 11 horses, and she started them all. The bay by Wednesday of the first week, and the gray by Friday, and all 11 by the end of the 6th week and 3 additional days, and every morning for 6 weeks and 3 additional days he was at the fence, and she ended up breaking something else. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to the paddock. The first week she started 3 horses. The bay was through its groundwork by Wednesday, which he would not have believed on Monday, and she had the gray in groundwork by Thursday and had the gray to the saddle by Friday. The third horse was the youngest of the string, a 2-year-old that had never had a person near it, and she had it standing quietly for a saddle blanket by the end of Friday, which was the right pace for a horse of that age. She worked methodically and without drama, starting early and finishing when the horse had had enough for the day. He could see that the determining of when the horse had had enough was not a clock determination and was not a fixed number of minutes. It was a reading. She read each horse at the end of the session the way she read it throughout, and what she read told her when the session had produced what it was going to produce for the day, and she ended it there and not later, because ending it when the horse was done and not after was part of the conversation. He found himself at the fence most mornings, which was to say all of them, and the morning at the fence had become the first part of the day before the rest of it. He did not manufacture reasons to be there, which he noticed in the second week when he became aware that he was at the fence again and had not arranged to be there and had arrived without a specific purpose related to the horses. He had work. The work was not the fence. He was at the fence. By the third week, he had stopped noticing that he was at the fence without a specific purpose and had begun simply to be there, in the way that you were somewhere when the being there had become part of the structure of the day. The fence in the morning before the work was part of the structure of his day. He did not examine this because the first and second weeks had already produced what the examining would have produced, which was the understanding that he was at the fence because she was there, and by the third week he did not need the examining to know this. She did not acknowledge the watching in the first week. She worked. He watched. The horses were getting started, and the starting of them was the whole of what needed to happen and was happening. Tell me, when she turned away from the bay that first morning at exactly the right moment, which was the moment the bay dropped its head and let out a breath and stopped testing the theory and decided to try something else, did you see what she knew that the previous 2 breakers did not? She did not make the horse do anything. She made the doing the horse's idea. The previous breakers had tried to make the bay stop resisting. She had simply been there long enough that the resistance produced nothing and the bay needed a new theory. She was the new theory. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now back to the paddock. In the second week, she began putting saddles on the horses that had their groundwork done. This was the part of the work that looked most like what people expected horsebreaking to look like, because it was the part where the horse had to learn to carry a person's weight, and the learning of it was sometimes rough. She made it as unrough as the horse allowed. Some horses allowed it to be very unrough. Some horses had a period of working it out that was loud and fast and ended the same way it always ended, which was with the horse deciding the saddle and the rider were not things that were going to kill it. He watched her ride the gray on a Wednesday in the second week, and the gray was a horse that was going to have a period of working it out, and it had its period of working it out, and she was on it through the whole of the period, and when the gray was done working it out, she was still there. On it, and she rode it quietly around the paddock until it was moving, softly under her, and then she got off and let it stand. He had been holding the top rail of the fence with both hands for approximately 4 minutes without knowing he was holding it. He had not noticed his hands on the rail. He had not noticed anything except what was happening in the paddock, which was a gray horse working out the thing it needed to work out, and a woman staying on it through the working out and coming out the other side with a horse that was moving quietly under her, as if the previous 4 minutes had not happened. Because for the horse they had not happened in the sense of being a problem. They had happened in the sense of being the last of it. She came to the fence after she put the gray up, and she looked at him for a moment in the specific way she had looked at the horses all week, which was to see what was actually there. She said the gray was going to be straightforward now. She said it had worked through its thing and was on the other side of it. He said he could see that. He said he had watched her ride it through, and he could see the difference in the horse now. She looked at him for a moment with the specific quality of looking that was not assessing and was not accusatory. She said he had been watching all week. He said it was his operation, and the horses in it were his horses, and he was where he had reason to be. She said it was. She said she had worked operations where the owner watched and operations where the owner did not, and it made no difference to the horses, and she was not saying he should not watch. He said, what was she saying? He said she could say it directly, and he would hear it directly. She said she was not saying anything that required a response. She said she was going to take the roan next. She took the roan next. The third week was the middle week of the 6, and the string was moving correctly. 7 of the 11 horses were started or in progress, and 4 were waiting, and the work had the rhythm of work that was going well, which was the rhythm of days that proceeded as planned and produced what they were supposed to produce. He came to the fence every morning of the third week. He was watching her. He had been watching her since the first morning and had told himself he was watching the horse and had stopped telling himself that in the second week because the telling had become a lie he was not willing to maintain. He was watching the way she worked, which was precise and quiet and without any performance of what she was doing or what she knew. She did not explain herself to the horses. She did not perform competence for anyone watching. She simply worked. And the work was what it was, and what it was very good. He was watching the way she read each horse differently, the specific adjustments she made from one to the next based on what each horse was showing her. With the young horses she was quick and clear and covered ground in the first session. With the mare that had the old problem she was slower and more careful, building from the beginning so that the old problem was addressed at the root and not just managed at the surface. He could see the difference in the approach, and he could see that the difference was intentional and was based on what the horse needed rather than on a single method applied to every horse regardless of what the horse needed. He was watching the way she moved around the paddock, which was the movement of a person who was fully present in what they were doing and was not somewhere else in their attention, even when nothing was happening. There were moments of stillness in the work. Moments when she was simply standing with a horse and nothing was occurring that a person on the outside of the fence would call activity. And in those moments, she was as present as she was when the horse was moving, and the quality of the presence was the same. She was entirely present. He had forgotten what that looked like and had not known he had forgotten it. He had been running the veer operation for 21 years and had been running it well. And across the 21 years and especially across the 16 years of running it alone, he had developed the specific efficiency of a person who had understood what was required of him and had provided it, and had not required anything of himself beyond that. He was efficient. He was competent. He was present in the sense that he was always paying attention to what the operation needed. He had not been present in the sense she was present, which was the sense of being in the specific moment he was in and not also in the next thing that needed doing, or the thing that had not been done correctly in the morning, or the calculation about the season's numbers. She was in the paddock. She was in the paddock in the full sense of the word, not in the paddock while also being partly somewhere else in her attention. He had watched her for 3 weeks and understood that this was a thing he had once been and was no longer. He could not say when he had stopped being it. He had become efficient instead, and efficient had been sufficient for 21 years, and watching her work he understood for the first time that sufficient was not the same as enough. He brought her coffee on the first morning of the 4th week. He did it without deciding to. He did not decide to bring it the way he decided things he had thought about. He was in the kitchen with the coffee and he poured 2 cups instead of 1, and he carried both cups to the fence and left one on the post and took the other with him and went to do his own work. He did not examine what he had done until he was across the property doing something else, and when he examined it he found it was simply what he had done. And he did not further examine it. She found the coffee when she came to the fence for the morning. She looked at it for a moment. She drank it. The next morning there was coffee on the post, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, and she drank it each morning without comment. And the coffee became a fact of the working day the way things became facts when no one said anything about them, and they continued anyway. She said something about it on Thursday. She had not said anything about it for 4 days. She came to the fence on Thursday and looked at the coffee on the post for a moment before she picked it up. She said she had not asked for coffee. She said it in the tone of a person noting a fact. He said he knew. She said it was good coffee. She said it was better than she made on the road, which was the coffee of a person who made it in whatever conditions the road produced and was therefore variable in quality depending on the conditions. He said he had been making it the same way for 20 years. He said, "You made a thing the same way for 20 years, and you got good at it." She was quiet for a moment with that. She looked at the fence post and the cup and then at him. She said 20 years was a long time to be making coffee for one person. He said it was. She said it in the tone of a person who was observing something, not in the tone of a person who required a response to the observation. He did not give a response to the observation. He had already given the response, which was it was. She went back to the horses. He watched her go back to the horses and he stayed at the fence. The string was 3 weeks from done. She would be there 3 more weeks, and then she would be somewhere else, because the work was the work, and the work moved. He understood this. He had hired breakers before, and they came, and they worked the string, and they left, and that was the arrangement. She would leave. He knew this. He also knew that he was at the fence every morning, and that the coffee was on the post every morning, and that he had not told himself any story about why, which was itself a story. And one he had decided not to tell himself, because not telling it was more honest than telling it. Tell me, when he brought the coffee to the fence without saying anything and just left it there, did you see what that was? He did not ask her if she wanted coffee. He made coffee and brought it and left it for her to find, and he went to do his own work. He was not performing anything, he was just doing the thing. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now back to the fence post. The 4th week, she started the last 4 horses. 2 of them were young and had no bad habits, only the inexperience of horses that had never had a person on them, and she had them moving under saddle in a day and a half each. One was a mare that had been poorly started somewhere before and had come to him with a problem that had never been correctly addressed, and she spent 3 days on the mare making sure the problem was addressed correctly this time. One was the horse he had told her nothing about, the black at the end of the paddock, because he had wanted to see what she made of it without his account of its history. She came to him at the end of the 4th week, which was the end of the 1st week she had been working the black. She said the black had been hurt. She said it the way she said things she was certain about, which was plainly. He said yes. He had known this when he bought the horse and had not told her because he wanted to see what she found without his account shaping what she was looking at. She said not physically. She said the black had been hurt in the way a horse was hurt when the person handling it had been unreliable. She said the horse did not know whether to expect pressure or release, and the not knowing had made it cautious in the way that cautious covered fear. He said the previous owner had been rough with it. He said he had bought the horse knowing this, because the price had been low enough that he understood why it was low, and he had known the horse would need more work than a horse that had not been through it, and he had brought her in for the full string because of it. She said it was not the roughness. She said rough was consistent, and a horse understood consistent. She said the previous owner had been unpredictable, which was the thing a horse could not learn to navigate. Because unpredictable meant there was nothing to read, and a horse that had nothing to read was a horse that stayed in the state of being ready for the worst, which was an exhausting state to maintain and produced a specific kind of damage. He was quiet with that. She said she was going to spend extra time on the black. She said it was going to take the remaining 2 weeks, and she might need 3 days into the 7th week if that was acceptable. He said it was acceptable. He said take the time the black needed, and the contract would reflect the time. She said she would need to know it was not a problem in the sense of him expecting the original timeline regardless. He said it was not a problem. He said take the time the black needed and not to make the timeline a constraint on the work. She looked at him. She said thank you. She said it in the specific tone of a person who meant it in a specific way. He said there was coffee on the post. He had put it there before he came to find her. She said she knew. She said there was always coffee on the post and had been for 3 weeks. He said yes. The 5th week, she worked the black. He watched every session of the 5th week without once telling himself he was watching the horse. The black was the kind of work he had never seen done patiently before, because the black required a specific quality of patience that was different from the patience the other horses required, which was not the patience of waiting for a horse to comply, but the patience of being entirely consistent, entirely predictable, every time and without exception, so that the horse's body could begin to learn that this person was the kind of person the horse could read, and the reading was possible, and the reading would not one day produce a surprise. She was consistent with the black in a way that was almost formal, which was the formality of complete reliability. Every approach the same, every release the same distance at the same moment in the same manner, the same sequence every time, so that the horse could see the sequence coming before it arrived and could understand where it was in the sequence and what was going to happen next. The black began to understand the sequence in the 3rd day. By the 5th day, it was waiting for the next step in the sequence with the specific quality of a horse that had begun to trust that the next step was coming and was going to be what it had been before. He watched this across every session of the 5th week, watching the black learn what reliable felt like, and understood something he had not expected to understand from watching a horse being started. He had been watching her work for 5 weeks, and he understood the method by now at the level of being able to anticipate what she was going to do next, which was not because her method was simple, but because he had been paying attention for 5 weeks. He knew the sequence. He could see the sequence with the black. Every approach the same, every release the same. The next step arriving where the horse expected it because she had built the expectation. The sequence was the conversation, and the conversation was the thing the black had never had with a person before. What he understood in the 5th week was what it looked like when a living thing that had learned to expect the worst was shown, repeatedly and without exception, that the worst was not what was coming. He had watched the black's body change across the week, the tension going out of it as the sequence proved reliable and then more reliable and then simply true. The horse was learning that this person was the kind of person that could be read, and the reading was not going to produce a surprise, and the learning was visible in the quality of the horse's stillness, which changed from the stillness of wariness to the stillness of something settling. He had stayed at the fence longer than he had stayed any previous week, and in some sessions he had not left at all until she put the horse up for the day. He stayed at the fence longer in the 5th week than he had stayed any week before, and in the 5th week he had not manufactured any reason for being there because he had stopped doing that 2 weeks ago. The 6th week was the last week of the original contract and the 3 additional days she had asked for. By Monday, the remaining horses in the string were done or in their final sessions, and by Wednesday, the string was done except for the black, and she was on the black for the 3 additional days. The black in the 6th week was a different horse from the black in the 4th week in every way that mattered. She had spent 2 weeks on it, and the sequence had been run through enough times that the sequence was what the horse expected. And what the horse expected had changed from the worst to the next correct thing, and the next correct thing arriving as expected was what trust was. She was not claiming the horse trusted her. She was claiming the horse had a working theory that this person was consistent and readable, and the working theory was being confirmed, and that was what the 6th week was. The confirmation. On Sunday of the 6th week, she put the black through the full sequence for the last time as a check and not as work, and the black was done, and the sequence held, and the string was finished. She came to him at the end of the last day, which was a Sunday, the 3rd of the additional 3 days, and the 45th day of the 6 weeks and 3 additional days. She said the black was started. She said the string was finished. She said those were the 2 things she had come to tell him. He said he could see that. He said he had been watching, and the black was a different horse from the one she had started on. She said she would be leaving Monday. She said it in the tone of a person who was saying a true thing, and not a person who was saying a true thing in order to be talked out of it. He said he knew. She was looking at the black in the paddock. She said it was a good horse. She said it had taken longer to show it that than the other horses had needed, and the longer was not the horse's fault, and the horse had always had the capacity to be what it now was. He was looking at her, looking at the black, in the way he had been looking at her for 6 weeks, which was with the specific quality of attention of a man who had decided he was going to pay attention and was paying it. He said her name. He said Lark. She said Galt. Said it the way she said things she was being direct about, which was plainly, and as the whole of what she was saying. Her name for him, said the way a name sounded, when it was the name of the man who had been at the fence every morning for 6 weeks, without manufacturing a reason to be there, and had brought coffee to the post without being asked, and without saying anything about the bringing, who had listened to her account of each horse without offering his own account unless she specifically asked him for it, who had been quiet with the thing about unpredictability and had not asked her to explain what she meant, and she had seen in the quiet that he had understood what she meant without the explanation. The man who had watched the black through the 5th week with the specific quality of attention of a man who was understanding something that was not about the horse. His name for her said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the woman who had arrived on a Monday with 11 horses to start and had started the bay by Wednesday of the 1st week, which he would not have believed, and had done the gray by Friday, and had worked through 6 weeks and 3 additional days with the specific economy of a person who knew exactly what the work required and provided what it required and nothing extra. The woman who had been entirely present every morning at the fence and in the paddock, and whose being entirely present had been the thing that broke something in him he had not known was closed until it was opening. He said the black is going to need consistent handling going forward, or the work won't hold. He said it in the tone of a man stating a fact rather than making an argument, because it was a fact and he was not making an argument. She said she knew that. She had started 63 horses, and she knew that the work she did was only as durable as the handling that followed, and the work on a horse that had been through what the black had been through was more fragile than most and would need more consistency than most. He said he was going to need someone who knew the horse and knew the sequence it had learned. And the sequence was specific to this horse, and building the horse's trust in the sequence from the beginning with someone new was going to take more time than the horse should be asked to spend on it. She looked at him for a moment. She said that was a specific thing to say at the end of the last day of the original contract. He said he was a specific man. He said he did not say things that were not specific, and he did not say things he did not mean. She said she had noticed that. She said she had been here 6 weeks, and she had noticed that he said specific things, and that the specific things were the things he meant. He said, "Stay." He said it the way he said the specific things he meant, which was directly and without qualification around it. She said yes. She said she had noticed he was a specific man across 6 weeks of mornings at the fence and 6 weeks of coffee on the post without comment and 6 weeks of listening to her account of each horse without offering his own account unless she asked for it. She looked at the black in the paddock. She had worked 63 horses across 11 years and had moved on from every one of them and had always moved on correctly. The moving on was what the work required. She had organized her life around the moving on and had not questioned the organization. She had liked the moving. The moving was part of the life, and she had suited herself to it, and it had suited her back, which was the specific kind of arrangement that worked because both sides of it were working. She arrived at a string, and she knew the horses, and she worked the string, and she left, and the leaving was clean, because she had done what she came to do, and the horses were started, and the operation had what it needed, and she had what the work produced, which was the knowledge of the next set of horses and what they needed, and the satisfaction of the work correctly done. She had liked the moving until this operation, which was the operation where she had arrived and had walked the fence looking at the string, and had noticed that the man walking beside her was looking at the horses the same way she was looking at them, not assessing them for value or for sale. Looking at them the way she looked at them, which was to understand them. She had noticed this on the first Monday morning and had filed it in the category of things she was noticing about this operation. She had worked 63 horses across 11 years and had moved on from every one of them and had always moved on correctly. The moving on was what the work required. She looked at the black in the paddock. The black was standing with the specific quality of a horse that had learned something difficult and was now in the first days of having learned it, which was a quality of attention that was different from the watchfulness it had had before. She had put 6 weeks into that horse, and the horse had put more than that into learning what she had shown it, and the work was going to need the consistency he had described, and she knew what happened when the work did not get the consistency it needed. She looked at him. She said, "I'll stay for the black." She said it the way she said things she had decided, which was plainly and without the performance of deciding, and it was the simplest and most accurate thing she could have said, and both of them knew it was not only about the black, and neither of them required the other to say that, as if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. The black needed consistent handling from someone who knew the sequence, and she knew the sequence, and staying was the correct response to that arithmetic. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held his gaze at the fence at the end of the last day, with the string done and the black in the paddock and the coffee cup on the post where it had been every morning for 6 weeks, and the 6 weeks behind them. He nodded once, the way he nodded at things he had decided and was not going to further consider. She said, "Galt." He said, "I know." He said it in the tone he had used since the first morning, which was the tone of a man who meant what he said and had been meaning it all along. She had started 63 horses across 11 years and had built a life organized around the starting of them and the moving on. She had moved from operation to operation with the work the way the work required, which was arriving at the beginning of a string and learning the specific horses in that string and finishing it correctly started and moving to the next operation where the next string was waiting. And the moving had been the life, and she had suited herself to it, and the life had suited her back. And the 64th horse was in the paddock. 63 horses, and she had moved on from every one of them. The 64th was in the paddock, and she had said, "I'll stay for the black," and the 64th was not the only reason she was staying, and she was not going to pretend the 64th was the only reason. It was not only about the black. She was a person who told the truth, and she was not going to pretend it was only about the black. The black needed consistent handling, and she knew the sequence, and both things were true. And neither of them was the whole of it. The whole of it was 6 weeks at a fence with a man who had been at the fence every morning and had brought coffee to the post without saying anything about it, and had been quiet with the unpredictability and the specific way of a man who understood something without having to ask what it meant. He had been alone on the Veery operation for 16 years. He had run it correctly and completely, and had been present to what the operation required of him, and the operation had required a great deal, and providing what it required had been the organizing principle of the 16 years. He had not noticed that what he had been providing had gradually narrowed to the operation, and had stopped including anything the operation did not require. He had not noticed this until he had spent 3 weeks watching a woman in his paddock who was providing everything the horses required and nothing that the horses did not require, and the specific efficiency of her presence had made him understand, by contrast, what his own presence had become, which was efficient and correct and sufficient and not enough. The something else she had broken was a thing she had not been trying to break. She had been trying to start the horses, and she had started them, and she had also broken something else, which was his settled certainty that he was complete as he was, and the breaking of it was what she had done by being entirely present every morning for 6 weeks in the paddock while he was at the fence. He had watched her work through the thing the black had been carrying, which was the specific damage of a horse that had learned to expect unpredictability and had protected itself from it by becoming cautious in the way that cautious covered fear. He had watched her show the black, day after day, that the sequence was reliable, and that reliability was what was coming. And he had understood, watching the black learn to trust the sequence, that he had been the black in some way that he could not fully articulate, but that was true. And that she had been showing him the same thing by simply being at the fence every morning with the coffee on the post and the work being done and the sequence being consistent, and the consistency was the thing. Galt Veer had been at the fence every morning. She had been in the paddock every morning. The fence had been between them for 6 weeks, and she had said, "I'll stay for the black," and the fence was still between them in the sense of being there, and neither of them was going to be on the other side of it from now on. The paddock was around them, and the black was in it, and the string was done, and 6 weeks were behind them, and neither of them was going to be somewhere else, and the something else was settled, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled. And both of them were staying, and it held.